As far as I'm concerned, Capcom came up with the perfect way to follow up their successful line of Street Fighter II games with the first Alpha title, and as expected, Street Fighter Alpha 2 improves upon the design of the first game so much that it truly is timeless in its quality and a masterpiece of fighting game craft. You're watching Rayl Deal Games, and today I'm sharing my thoughts on Alpha 2, and by the end of this video, I'll explain why the game is a timeless masterpiece. Many of the things I said in my Alpha review apply to Alpha 2, as the two games pretty much share the relationship that World Warrior and Champion Edition do, except for the fact that Alpha 2 does not ruin the PvE or single player experience like Champion Edition did with its overclocked AI. By this point in the 90s, arcade games in general started honing their difficulty designs to the point of near perfection. You see, the business model back then necessitated that game design not only be immediately fun and exciting, so as to draw in prospective players, but they also needed to leave the player with a positive play experience so that they'd want to return and spend more quarters in the machine. I don't have the raw data or numbers, but I suspect that Capcom realized that their Street Fighter games made all of their real money via PvP play, meaning they were able to balance the difficulty design of their games in such a way to be more friendly to players new to the fighting game genre. The established audience would more likely want to just play with their friends after all, which doubled the potential money earnings of any particular machine. The goal then, I suspect, was to get players' skills up to a point where they would be able to, and willing, to compete with other players, which was only going to happen if they had a space in which to practice and go through the getting good process of the game. This is why Alpha is so easy, I think. In fact, I left Alpha kind of feeling like the game was too easy, so I wasn't surprised at all when I booted up Alpha 2 and saw that it was more difficult than the first game. More difficult doesn't mean hard, however, as there were very few instances where I got stuck while completing this game with every single character on the cast. Whenever I play games designed for arcades, I always record how many credits or quarters it would have taken to play the game back in the day. By the end of my time with the game, Alpha 2 would cost me $43.50, which is $91 and 1 single penny when adjusted for inflation. This means that Alpha 2 took almost 3 times the number of credits to complete with each character as Alpha, which shows two things. The game is a bit more difficult, and this game has many more characters. As always, I started with Ryu, and it only took me 3 credits to finish my playthrough with him. What I find most interesting about his arcade campaign is how Akuma replaces Sagat as his final boss. Considering the fact that the Alpha series is a prequel to the SF2 series of games, I had assumed that Sagat and Ryu would remain exclusive enemies throughout this trilogy. It makes sense that Akuma takes a more dominant place in the core design of Alpha 2's campaigns, especially given the way in which he is the hardest boss from the SF2 games. One of the big problems with making canonically powerful characters playable or easier to defeat is that it kind of deconstructs the mystique of the character. In Super Turbo, Akuma is a real threat hidden in the shadows, but now he's just part of the Street Fighter family. Capcom definitely did this because of how many people love Akuma, which definitely off-balances the sense of disappointment I personally felt fighting him in this game. The combos in Alpha 2 feel more smooth than Alpha, which I'm not sure whether that is a consequence of the emulation present in the 30th anniversary collection, or an intentional design change between the two games. This one aspect of Alpha 2 is what makes me love it so much more than the first game though. Adon is the only character I've ever managed to get a 1 credit clear with in all of the Street Fighter games I've played so far. This time though, he cost me $3.50 of metaphorical money. By the time I finished my Adon playthrough, he absolutely became my least favorite in the Alpha line of games. I just don't find this character particularly fun to play because his game plan doesn't line up with the play patterns I typically like in fighting games. I did become victim to the Alpha counter system during this playthrough, which is a mechanic I didn't know existed during my time with Alpha. Because I play these games as close to 100% guideless as possible, this sort of stuff does come up from time to time. Really, the only downside of this is that it felt incredibly cheap to die to AI's Alpha counters, but it was really only Ryu and Guy that seemed to abuse this mechanic. I did nearly complete a 1 credit clear with Nash, but Bison ended that dream, meaning he cost me $1 by the end of my time with him. I started playing Alpha 2 with a blend of D-pad and analog stick controls to help with some of the more D-pad unfriendly special move inputs. You see, Capcom fighters from this era were designed primarily with the arcades and arcade sticks in mind, and the input codes for special moves are set up the way they are because of this design focus. If I had to guess, this is quite possibly what factored into 90s 90s and early 2000s era pro players' belief that playing on anything other than an arcade stick was inferior. Games in the console era made controls more D-pad and face button friendly, which is something I definitely want to take a closer look at when I get to Street Fighter 4 and 5. Those are the first mainline Street Fighter games that were designed with consoles in mind from the ground up. Changing up the way I played Alpha 2 did make me enjoy Nash more this time around, although I wouldn't say I like him more than Guile in SF2 still. Rolento cost me $3.50, and I chose this guy next in my lineup because I vaguely remembered him from back in the days when I would watch Street Fighter 4 tournaments all the time while I was in college. Looking through some old matches, I figured out where I remembered this character from, that iconic match between Low Tier God and Viscant.
Know me as Low Tier God. You said it, say it to my face right now.
All right. I'm sorry. I'm getting a little. You're getting too high. And that's it. That's it. AJ is popping off. He is popping off right now.
Rewatching those matches is probably the best moment from my time with this character though, because I wasn't a big fan of him. Like, I love the way Rolento throws a grenade at the opponent from time to time upon victory, but playing the character just didn't jive with me. Unfortunately, Dhalsim has a little bit of the same issue he did in his SF2 appearances. The AI's input reading means they can counter every single attack the player commits to on reaction. This character has always been one that is just terrible in the PvE or versus AI context. However, I wouldn't be shocked to learn that he's actually pretty decent in PvP. Bison cost me $4, and this is the first playthrough where I managed to successfully use a few alpha counters. It's not a mechanic I'm able to use reliably, more because it's sometimes incredibly difficult to anticipate what the AI is going to do, since they love to use attacks in the middle of my combos. Alpha 2 is a game that is mostly flawless in its design, however, one major issue with this game is the way Ryu specifically has cracked AI. No joke, Ryu is the toughest normal CPU opponent, regardless of which round the player comes across him. Bison cost me $4, a total of 8 credits, but 7 of those were lost to Ryu alone. What makes Ryu so much more difficult than every other character in the game is the way he simply loves, to use supers the instant the player presses any button. It really gets to the point sometimes where I learned to bait out Ryu's super meters before going on the offensive, because that's the only way to ensure he doesn't get a free 80% damage or so over the course of a round. This issue permeated my other playthroughs too. Sodom is the character from Alpha I disliked the most, but in this game I actually grew to like him. He cost me $6.50, and 10 of those credits, $5, was stolen by Guy. Ryu might spam supers on reaction to any button press, however he and Guy also do something else: alpha counter spam. It's probably not a good idea to make it possible for the AI to spam this mechanic, since it means that the player isn't safe when they do successfully go on the offensive. I eventually just accepted that I would effectively only have 20% of my health pool when going up against Guy and Ryu. If I were to play Alpha 2 more, Sodom would be on my list of characters to try to learn because I enjoyed his wake up specials mechanic and the way he uses psi attacks while also having command grabs. A crouching heavy punch into one of these psi slashes seemed to be a confirmed combo, but that's something I'd have to experiment with more to truly ascertain. Sagat's campaign cost me $2.50 and is the most fun I've had with this character in these games. My favorite part of his arcade campaign is his final fight against Ryu because it comes with the coolest stage in all of Street Fighter and possibly in all of sprite-based fighters in general. The field of flowing grass, accentuated by lightning striking periodically, truly gives the fight a cinematic flair that sets it apart from every other stage. These sorts of stages are something I hope future Street Fighter games do more of, because Sagat's arcade playthrough feels like one of the only ones to end in a super cool climactic boss fight. Chun-Li feels a bit better than she did in Alpha, so I wouldn't be shocked to hear that she goes up in pro players' tier lists between the two games. I didn't find any super cool combos with her myself, but part of that has to do with the fact that Alpha 2 lacks a training mode. Alpha 3 does have a training mode, so I'm excited to be able to experiment with her moves more to actually learn something cool to do with her. But for Alpha 2, I essentially played her as a neutral game character, which is just not as exciting as what other characters can do in this game. It attests to Alpha 2's design that the more traditional sort of Street Fighter play is boring in comparison comparison to the more fun, combo-centric one present in this game. Experimental game design is something Capcom went further with the design of Gen as well. He's the first character where I learned you can dump multiple meters into a single super, which is a super cool mechanic. Meter management is one of the major innovations in the Alpha Trilogy, and this adds an additional element of decision-making player side. It's clear Capcom was trying to really flip the script in loads of design aspects with the Alpha Trilogy, and Gen himself is a perfect example of this. He's a stance character, quite possibly the first to ever exist in the fighting game genre, I'm not sure. Gen's arcade campaign ends with a fight against Akuma, and it's interesting that he seems to have a more personal connection to Akuma. This is just another reason why I think Akuma and Ryu shouldn't be rivals in this game, as Gen and Akuma work super well against each other. Guys, it keeps happening. With Birdie this time, not only was I able to hit the 360 command grab inputs, but I was also able to hit confirm into a super grab with him as well to finish out my final round against Bison. This is a huge dopamine booster for me because I've been working really hard at getting these motions ingrained into my muscle memory, and considering the fact that I take several weeks off between each one of these Street Fighter games I cover on the channel when I'm actually playing through them, I love that I'm keeping these skills even when they're no longer being actively practiced. Sakura was my 12th character, and this is where my gameplay began to really suffer while playing this game. I got to her the same day I had a wisdom tooth extraction procedure, and I was experiencing a pretty significant amount of pain for the rest of my time with Alpha 2 because of how close that was to one of my nerves in the jaw. I'm only mentioning this now because this outside factor impacted my impression of many characters remaining in the game. Since my Sakura run began literally right after I got home from the dentist, she cost me $5, 9 credits of which Ryu beat out of me on his own. He loved to use his Super Hadouken attack upon reaction in nearly every single match I had with him, which got annoying super fast. This is not something I hold against the game though, as the physical pain I was in made me incredibly moody and prone to low patience. Just like in Alpha, Guy is super fun to play. In round 2 with Bison, I had this super sick corner combo where I hit confirmed into his super for massive damage. This character makes it feel like I'm playing Mortal Kombat, which is one of the major things that makes Guy one of my favorites in Alpha 2. I said last week in my Alpha review that I suspect Rose's Soul Illusion Super to be one of the most broken things in these Alpha games, and Alpha 2 made me settle more into this opinion. I'd love to see someone do some seriously broken stuff with her, as the simple combos I came up with on the fly felt super powerful on their own. I mean, I was able to get a perfect on my final round against Bison using it because the pressure pushed him all the way to the corner while also doing insane damage. This one super makes Alpha 2 a much cooler game and is one major reason I'd come back to it. I nearly had another 1 credit clear with Zangief right afterwards, but this run was ended by Ken. This is my first time playing Gief since Super Turbo, and I was pleased to see how easy I found it to activate his 360 command grabs, but this did make apparent another issue for me to get better at. You see, I could get Zangief's grabs to come out, but I couldn't actually land any of them. Hit confirming into them is my next major goal for Gief moving forward, and is something I'm going to practice during my time with Alpha 2. At this point, it was finally time for me to use Akuma properly for the first time. The first thing I noticed with this character is just how incomprehensible some of his supers are. I don't comprehend what the input for Shungoku Satsu is, and as such I never used it during my time with Akuma. The final match for the Akuma Arcade Tower at first seemed to be a beefed up Akuma that was able to deal enough damage to absolutely delete 60% of my health bar in one single super. At first, I thought this was just a unique issue with Akuma, where I was going to have to really work for the completion of his arcade campaign, but after losing here, I was put up against Gen, and this was disappointing. I was actually excited at the prospect of fighting Akuma, and this was a definite downgrade. That Akuma loss was my only one during this playthrough, making this my 4th near 1 credit clear run. Akuma is far more fun in Alpha 2 than he has ever been, and is another reason to revisit this game in the future. I saved Dan for the near end of my time with Alpha 2 because he's the joke figure of this game. What's most surprising about my time with Dan is that I actually had some real solid fun with the character. He cost me $150, and I finished his campaign with a super finish on Sagat. To finish out each of these Street Fighter games, I have to do a victory lap with Ken, and even though he cost me $2.50, I had the most fun playing with Ken in Alpha 2. Ryu beat $2 out of me, which I think is part of the reason I had so much fun in the grand scheme of things with Ken. Ryu is just simply broken, and I had accepted that fairly early on into my time with the game. Even though he's the most broken character in the game AI side, he's still not as bad as Guile in World Warrior, Blanca in Champion Edition and Turbo, or the general difficulty in the American version of Super Turbo. The way I end every review on this channel is by answering the question, will this game make my top 100 of the 90s? Street Fighter Alpha 2 will be making my top 100 of the 90s in the blue category, which means it'll be in the first round of cuts if I need to fit more games on my top 100. It'll be replacing Shinobi 3 Return of the Ninja Master. The raw gameplay improvements, the campaign design, the explosion of the playable roster makes Alpha 2 infinitely better than Alpha, a game that was already close to making my top 100 just last week. The design of this game is timeless, and by the end of my time with it, I'm only left with the feeling that this is one of the greatest 90s fighting games, a true masterpiece of arcade game design. And that's the video, my guys. What do you all think of Alpha 2? Let's discuss in the comments below, and while you're down there, consider smashing that like button, subscribing, and ringing the notification bell. My review for Alpha 3 drops next Friday, and if that sounds interesting to you, you'll definitely want to stick around. Regardless of what you choose to do, thank you for keeping it real with Rayl Deal Games. Have a great day, dudes.